The Mafia boss discovered his black maid's past. What happened next was unbelievable. Jasmine Carter never expected her past to catch up with her. Working as a maid for the powerful Dominic Romano, the notorious Mafia boss, she had always kept her life private. Her past, full of heartache and survival, was something she wanted to leave behind. But little did she know, a single act of kindness would lead to a discovery that would change everything. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning the Romano mansion, Jasmine found herself wiping down the grand library. It was an ordinary day, or so it seemed. But as she moved toward the corner shelf, a book fell from the top shelf, landing at her feet. As she bent down to pick it up, her eyes caught the worn, faded photograph tucked inside. The photo showed a much younger version of Dominic, standing beside his family. But what caught her off guard was the woman beside him, his mother. Jasmine froze. It was a moment of clarity she hadn't expected. The woman in the photo reminded her of someone from her past, someone she had never been able to forget. For a brief moment, Jasmine stood there, staring at the image. She wasn't supposed to be looking at personal items belonging to her employer, but the memory of that woman made it impossible to look away. She quickly placed the book back on the shelf and walked away, hoping Dominic hadn't noticed. But as she exited the library, her heart began to race. She tried to shake the feeling that something was about to change, but she couldn't escape the nagging thought that the past had a way of resurfacing. That evening, after the mansion had settled into its usual quiet, Dominic appeared in the hallway, just as Jasmine was finishing her shift. His presence was commanding as always, his dark eyes scanning the room before they landed on her. "Jasmine," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "There's something I need to ask you." Jasmine's stomach tightened. She had always kept her distance from Dominic, understanding that in his world, weakness was not tolerated. She had learned early on to avoid getting too close. "Yes, Mr. Romano," she replied, trying to mask the unease in her voice. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "I found something earlier," he said, his tone softer now. "Something that belongs to you." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea what he was referring to. As he reached into his jacket pocket, he pulled out the same photo she had seen earlier. "Is this someone you know?" he asked. The air between them grew thick with tension. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of the situation settled over her. She had never imagined that a simple photograph could bring so much to light. Dominic's eyes softened as he watched her. "It's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to explain anything right now. But I know you've been carrying a lot with you. And I want you to know, you're not alone here." Jasmine stood frozen, unable to find the words to respond. For the first time since she had entered his service, she saw Dominic not as the Mafia boss, but as someone who understood the weight of loss and the burden of secrets. It was a moment that would forever change the course of their lives. Jasmine stood there, her breath caught in her throat as Dominic Romano continued to hold the photo in front of her. She had never expected her past to be exposed like this, especially not by the man who held so much power in his hands. The photograph was not just a mere image. It was a door to memories she had tried so hard to bury. She had always kept her personal life sealed away, never allowing anyone to see the vulnerability she carried within. But now, in front of the Mafia boss who had the ability to change her life in an instant, her past was coming to the surface. Dominic's gaze softened, sensing the tension in the room. His eyes didn't feel as cold as they usually did. They were warm, searching, almost understanding. "You know," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "I've seen that woman before. I think it's about time you tell me who she is." Jasmine's heart raced as she thought of how to respond. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her, but she knew that now, there was no turning back. She had to be honest, even if it meant revealing parts of herself she had never shared with anyone. "That's my mother," Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Her name was Elaine Carter. She passed away when I was very young. She was everything to me." Dominic nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Jasmine could see that he was processing her words, trying to understand the story behind the woman in the photo. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his tone sincere. Jasmine didn't know how to respond. For years, she had kept her emotions buried, never allowing herself to grieve properly. Her mother's death had shaped her life in ways she couldn't fully express, and now, here she was, telling a complete stranger about her deepest pain. She forced herself to meet his eyes. It's been hard, she said, her voice trembling. After she passed, I was alone. I had to grow up fast, take care of myself. I started working at a young age, doing whatever I could to survive. But it wasn't enough. I got into a bad situation. I ended up doing things I'm not proud of, things I thought I'd never escape from. Dominic's gaze didn't waver. You don't have to explain yourself, he said quietly. Everyone has their past. But that doesn't define you. Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She had never heard those words before, not from anyone who mattered. It was strange to hear them now, from someone like Dominic, who had the world at his feet. I thought I could leave it behind, she continued, her voice shaking. But sometimes, the past follows you. I thought I could forget about it, but it never really goes away. Dominic stood in silence for a moment, as if contemplating her words. The air between them felt thick, charged with unspoken understanding. He finally spoke again, his voice softer. You don't have to carry that burden anymore, Jasmine. You don't have to be defined by what you've been through. Jasmine looked up at him, disbelief washing over her. Could it be true? Could someone like Dominic, someone who was always surrounded by power and wealth, actually understand her pain? She didn't know. But something about the way he said those words made her want to believe him. I'm sorry for the way you've been treated, he added, his voice steady. You deserve better than that. Jasmine felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, the sensation of someone seeing her, truly seeing her, for who she was. She wasn't just the maid. She wasn't just the woman with a past filled with shame. She was Jasmine Carter, a woman who had survived, who had fought, who had done whatever it took to stay afloat. And for the first time in years, someone recognized that. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Dominic's expression softened further, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something between them, an understanding, a connection that neither of them had anticipated. He looked down at the photo again, and then back at her. I want you to know that you don't have to hide from your past anymore. Whatever you need, I'll help you. You're not alone. Jasmine was speechless. She didn't know what to say. The man who could crush entire empires with a word was offering her his help, his protection. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the heavy weight of her past begin to lift, just a little bit. Thank you, she said again, her voice thick with emotion. Dominic nodded, his gaze steady. I'll make sure of it. The moment hung in the air, a turning point neither of them had expected. For Jasmine, it was a chance at redemption, a chance to finally put her past to rest. For Dominic, it was the beginning of something more, something that would change the course of both their lives forever. Jasmine had never felt a weight lifted from her shoulders quite like this before. As she continued to stand in front of Dominic, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. For so long, she had lived with the burden of her past, hiding behind a mask of indifference, telling herself that if she just kept working, kept quiet, maybe the world would forget who she really was. But Dominic's words had cracked open something she had buried deep inside. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just someone to be ignored or pushed aside. She was a person with a history, with a story that deserved to be heard. And Dominic, despite his reputation, had given her that chance. As days passed, Jasmine noticed a subtle shift in her interactions with him. It wasn't that anything drastically changed, but there was a newfound respect between them. When she entered a room, it was no longer with the sense of invisibility that had once defined her role. Now, when Dominic spoke to her, his words were kinder, his tone softer. She felt seen, for the first time in years. But it wasn't just his treatment of her that changed. Dominic's demeanor was different, too. There was a certain vulnerability he had never shown before. He had always been cold, distant. At least, that's how it had seemed to everyone else. But now, when Jasmine saw him, there was something more to him. A part of him that had been hidden, perhaps even from himself. One afternoon, as Jasmine was cleaning the large dining room, Dominic entered the room, his usual confident stride slowed by something she couldn't quite place. He paused for a moment, watching her work. Jasmine felt his gaze on her, but instead of the usual tension that came with his presence, she felt a strange sense of calm. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the room as he spoke. You're doing a good job, he said, his voice softer than usual. Jasmine looked up, surprised by the compliment. Thank you, sir, she replied, unsure how to respond. I've been thinking, Dominic continued, his voice thoughtful. There's something about you, Jasmine. You've been through more than most people could handle, and yet you're still standing. That kind of strength, it's rare. Jasmine swallowed, her heart skipping a beat. No one had ever said something like that to her. She had spent so much of her life feeling small, feeling like she didn't matter, and yet here was Dominic, someone who had the world at his feet, telling her she was strong. It felt surreal. I just do what I have to, she said quietly, not sure how to process his words. Dominic nodded, his expression serious. You deserve more than this, Jasmine. More than being treated like you're invisible. Her breath caught in her throat. She had spent so long believing that she wasn't worth anything, that she was just a maid, a servant, someone who would never be seen as more than that. But Dominic's words, they made her question everything. Could it be possible that she was worth more than she had allowed herself to believe? Dominic's gaze softened as he looked at her, and for the first time, Jasmine saw him not as the Mafia boss, not as the powerful, untouchable man, but as someone who genuinely cared. I know you've been through a lot, he said, his voice low. But you don't have to carry all that alone. Not anymore. Jasmine felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She couldn't let him see her cry. She wasn't that person anymore. She had learned to be strong, to keep her emotions buried deep inside. But in that moment, with Dominic standing there, offering her something she had never thought she would receive, understanding, she felt a flood of emotion rush over her. I never thought I would find someone who could understand, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Someone who wouldn't just see me as nothing. Dominic stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. You're not nothing, Jasmine. You never were. There was a long silence between them, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word. Jasmine couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her like this, like she was important, like she mattered. And as Dominic stood there, his gaze unwavering, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, she could leave the past behind. Maybe she could have a future that wasn't defined by the things she had done, by the life she had been forced to live. As the days turned into weeks, Jasmine's relationship with Dominic continued to evolve. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was real. He didn't treat her like a maid anymore. He treated her like a person, someone deserving of respect, someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered. She could see it in the way he looked at her, in the way he spoke to her, and it was the first time in her life that she felt like she was truly seen. One evening, as the sun set over the mansion, Dominic approached Jasmine as she was finishing her work in the garden. The golden light cast long shadows, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. He stopped in front of her, his expression thoughtful. I want to offer you something, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of something else, something more personal. A position within the family, not as a maid, but as someone who has the potential to do more. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. What do you mean? She asked, her voice tentative. Dominic's gaze never left hers. I want you to be more than just someone who cleans. I want you to be part of something bigger. You've earned it, Jasmine. The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Jasmine felt a surge of emotion, but she couldn't quite find the words to express what she was feeling. All she knew was that this was a turning point in her life, a chance to start over, to leave the past behind and step into a future she had never dared to dream of. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out. Jasmine stood in front of Dominic, the offer he had made to her lingering in the air between them. She had never imagined her life could take such a turn. Only a few weeks ago, she was just another invisible maid in his mansion, cleaning the grand halls and maintaining the immaculate estate. But now, Dominic was offering her something that went beyond the usual role of a servant. He was offering her a future, a chance to prove her worth beyond the walls she had lived within for so long. The weight of his words settled in her chest. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic smiled, a rare and genuine expression that softened his usually stern features. You don't need to say anything. Just think about it. You've earned this. Jasmine's mind raced as she processed what he was offering her. A position within the family. Not as a maid, not as someone who simply cleaned and cooked, but as someone who had the potential to be part of something greater. She never imagined she would be offered this kind of opportunity, let alone from someone like Dominic. She had spent so much of her life trying to remain invisible, trying to blend into the background and avoid drawing attention to herself. She never expected to be seen for who she truly was, someone who had fought her way through life, someone with strength, resilience, and a deep capacity for kindness. "Why me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Dominic's expression turned serious as he stepped closer to her. "Because I see something in you, Jasmine. You've proven that you're more than just a maid. You've shown strength, loyalty, and a kind heart. I think that's something worth nurturing." Jasmine's heart swelled at his words, but a part of her hesitated. Could she really leave behind the life she had known for so long? Could she take the step into something new, something that was so far removed from the person she had been? But as she looked into Dominic's eyes, she saw something there that she had never seen before, a genuine desire to help her, to give her a chance. And for the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't know exactly what this opportunity would look like or how it would change her life, but she knew she had to take it. She had spent so much time buried under the weight of her past, never allowing herself to dream of a different future. But now, Dominic had given her that chance. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady with determination. "I'll take the opportunity." Dominic nodded, his expression softening further. "Good. You won't regret it." As the days passed, Jasmine began her new role with the family. It wasn't an instant transformation. She still had moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether she was really worthy of the position she had been given. But with every passing day, she grew more confident. She worked side by side with Dominic, handling important tasks and learning more about the family's business than she ever imagined. The work was challenging, but Jasmine found a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. She wasn't just cleaning the mansion anymore. She was contributing to something much bigger. But it wasn't just the work that changed. Jasmine's relationship with Dominic evolved, too. He began to rely on her, asking for her input and trusting her judgment. She could see the respect he had for her growing, and it filled her with a sense of pride. It was as if the walls that had once separated them, his world of power and wealth, and her world of hardship and struggle, were slowly crumbling. One evening, as they sat in the grand study of the mansion, working late on some paperwork, Dominic looked up from his desk and met Jasmine's eyes. "You've been doing great," he said, his voice quiet but full of sincerity. Jasmine smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you. I'm just trying to do my best." Dominic nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. "You know, Jasmine," he said, his voice softer, "I'm not just offering you a job. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something real. You've got potential, and I want to help you realize it." Jasmine's heart raced. She had never expected to hear these words from someone like Dominic. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was someone who truly saw her. She could feel the weight of that moment, the shift in their dynamic. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone who had a place in this world, a place in his world. As the evening drew to a close, Dominic stood and walked toward the door, but then paused and turned to her. "I know I don't say this often, but I'm proud of you," he said, his voice sincere. Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so many years believing that she would never amount to anything, that she was destined to stay in the background, unnoticed and unimportant. But now, Dominic's words were a balm to her wounded soul. She wasn't invisible anymore. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Dominic smiled at her, his eyes filled with a warmth she had never seen before. "You deserve more than you realize," he said, "and I'll make sure you get it." Jasmine watched him leave the room, a sense of purpose filling her heart. She knew that this was just the beginning. She was no longer a woman defined by her past. She was a woman with a future, and for the first time in years, she was ready to embrace it. The weeks that followed Dominic's offer were a whirlwind of change for Jasmine. What once felt like an insurmountable wall between her and the life she had always dreamed of was now crumbling, piece by piece. She was no longer just a maid in the mansion. She was becoming an integral part of something bigger, something that was hers to shape. As Jasmine worked alongside Dominic, she realized that this new life came with its challenges. The responsibilities she had taken on were far greater than any cleaning task she had ever done. Now, she was involved in decisions, in meetings, and in discussions that affected the entire family business. It was overwhelming at times, but with each task she completed, Jasmine felt a growing sense of pride. She wasn't the woman she had been when she first walked through the mansion's doors. Her hands weren't just those of a servant. They were the hands of someone who mattered. Dominic had given her more than a job. He had given her a voice. It was the first time she had felt seen for who she truly was. One morning, as Jasmine sat in the garden, reviewing some documents Dominic had entrusted her with, she heard footsteps behind her. She looked up and saw Dominic approaching, his usual composed demeanor softened by a rare, relaxed smile. "You're doing well," he said, his voice calm and approving. Jasmine nodded, a bit taken aback by his praise. She had become used to his praise, but there was something about this moment that made it feel different. "Thank you, Dominic. I'm just trying to keep up," she replied, trying to hide the nervousness she felt. Dominic stopped in front of her, his gaze intense but warm. "You don't have to keep up. You're already ahead." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. He was right. She wasn't just trying to fit in anymore. She was standing on her own 2 feet, making decisions that mattered. Dominic sat down beside her, his gaze lingering on the papers in her hands. "I've been thinking," he said, after a moment of silence. "You've proven yourself time and again. I trust you." The words hung in the air, and Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. She had never thought of herself as someone who could be trusted with the kind of responsibility Dominic was offering her. But here she was, a woman who had once felt invisible, now earning his trust. "You're more than capable," he continued. "I want you to take on something bigger. I want you to manage the accounts for the family business. It's time you took the next step." Jasmine stared at him, her mind racing. Managing the accounts? It was a huge responsibility, one that could either make or break her. She had never worked with numbers like that before. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Dominic smiled, a reassuring, almost fatherly expression on his face. "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't believe in you." Jasmine felt the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders, but this time, instead of fear, there was something else inside her, a spark of excitement. This was her chance to prove herself even further. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady now. "I won't let you down." Dominic gave a small nod, his eyes softening. "I know you won't." Over the next few days, Jasmine threw herself into her new role. She worked tirelessly, learning the ins and outs of the family business, carefully reviewing financial documents, and making decisions that affected everything from investments to operational costs. It was challenging, but it felt right. She had always been good at problem solving, and now, for the first time, she was using those skills in a way that mattered. As Jasmine immersed herself in this new world, she found herself growing closer to Dominic. They spent more time together, not just as employer and employee, but as 2 people who had built a unique bond. She could see that his respect for her wasn't just professional, it was personal. He relied on her, trusted her opinion, and valued her judgment. And in return, Jasmine found herself developing a deep sense of admiration for him. Dominic was more than just a powerful mafia boss. He was a man who, despite his hardened exterior, had a capacity for kindness and understanding that surprised her. One evening, after a long day of work, Jasmine found herself alone in the library, organizing files. She had just finished preparing a report when Dominic walked in. He had a rare, relaxed look about him, his tie loosened, and his sleeves rolled up. He looked at her, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "You're still working?" he asked, his voice light. Jasmine shrugged, her eyes focused on the papers in front of her. "I'm almost done." "You don't have to stay so late," he said, stepping closer. "I can take care of things for you." She glanced up at him, her heart pounding slightly in her chest. "I don't mind," she replied, offering him a small smile. Dominic leaned against the desk, his gaze thoughtful. "You know, Jasmine, I've never met anyone like you." She raised an eyebrow, unsure of where the conversation was heading. "What do you mean?" "You're strong," he said, his voice sincere. "You've had to fight for everything you've earned, and yet, you're still kind. You haven't let the world turn you cold. That's something I admire." Jasmine felt her cheeks flush slightly. "I didn't have a choice," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've always had to keep going." Dominic nodded, his gaze never leaving her. "I know," he said quietly, "but it takes something special to keep your heart intact after everything you've been through. You've done that." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Jasmine wasn't sure what to say. She had never thought of herself as anything other than a survivor, but hearing Dominic speak like this made her question everything. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe she was living. And maybe, for the first time, she had found a place where she truly belonged. The days seemed to blend together as Jasmine found herself adapting more and more to her new life. She was no longer just the woman cleaning the floors of the Romano estate. She was becoming someone important, someone whose contributions mattered. The more she immersed herself in the family business, the more she realized how much potential she had within herself. But with that potential came a new set of challenges. Jasmine's role was no longer confined to organizing documents or running errands. She was now working closely with Dominic, making decisions, and even attending meetings with high-ranking members of the family. It was both thrilling and terrifying. She had never imagined herself in such a position, but she was determined to prove that she was more than capable. One evening, after another long day of reviewing documents and discussing plans with Dominic, Jasmine found herself sitting alone in the garden, taking in the cool evening air. It was a rare moment of peace, one she had come to treasure in the midst of the whirlwind her life had become. As she sat on the bench, looking out at the vast estate, her thoughts drifted. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who had struggled every day just to survive, and how far she had come since then. It seemed impossible that the woman who had once been invisible to the world was now someone who had a voice, who was trusted by the most powerful man in the city. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. Jasmine's thoughts were interrupted when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Dominic walking toward her, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. He looked more relaxed than usual, his usually stern expression softening in the gentle light of the setting sun. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice casual but with an underlying warmth. Jasmine smiled and gestured to the seat next to her. "Of course, Dominic." He sat down beside her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the wind. "You've been doing great," Dominic finally said, his tone sincere. "I've noticed how much you've taken on, how much you've grown." Jasmine felt a rush of emotion at his words. She had worked so hard to prove herself, to show that she was capable of handling everything he had entrusted her with. But hearing him acknowledge it, hearing him say that he had noticed, made all the difference. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm doing my best." Dominic turned to her, his gaze intense. "Your best is more than enough," he said, his voice low. "You've exceeded every expectation I had. I never would have guessed that someone like you, someone with your background, could become such an integral part of the family." Jasmine's heart swelled at his words. She had spent so long feeling like she wasn't enough, like she didn't belong in this world. But now, Dominic was telling her that she had more than earned her place. "I never thought I'd be here," Jasmine said, her voice soft. "I never thought I'd be someone who could make a difference." "You're making a huge difference," Dominic replied, his voice steady and firm. "You've shown more strength and determination than most people ever will." Jasmine looked at him, her heart racing. In that moment, she realized just how much she had changed. She had gone from being a woman who lived in fear of being judged and overlooked to someone who was seen, valued, and respected. And that change, that transformation, was something she would never take for granted. Dominic shifted slightly, his gaze lingering on her. "There's something else I want to offer you," he said, his voice quieter. Now, as if he was weighing his words carefully, Jasmine turned to him, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about how far you've come, and I want to make sure you continue to grow. I know you've been taking on more responsibility, but I want you to have more freedom, more control. You've proven you're capable, Jasmine. I want to give you more of a say in the direction of the family business." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. More control? More responsibility? She had never imagined such an opportunity could be hers. "You want me to help run the business?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dominic nodded. "Yes, I trust you. I think you have the vision and the drive to take things even further." Jasmine couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of. But it also came with immense pressure. Running a business wasn't something she had ever imagined herself doing, but now, with Dominic's trust in her, it felt possible. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice firm with resolve. Dominic smiled, his expression warm. I know you won't. You've already proven more than enough. As they sat in the garden, the world around them felt different. It was as if everything had shifted. Jasmine wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a businesswoman, a trusted member of the family. And with that realization came a new sense of purpose. For the first time in her life, Jasmine felt like she was truly in control of her own destiny. And as Dominic sat beside her, offering her more than she could have ever imagined, she knew that this was only the beginning. As the days passed, Jasmine found herself growing into her new role. What had started as a simple offer to manage the family business's accounts had expanded into something far greater. She was no longer just handling paperwork or making minor decisions. She was becoming an integral part of the Romano family's operations. Dominic trusted her more and more, and with that trust came responsibility. Jasmine had never imagined herself in such a position. She had spent most of her life in survival mode, never allowing herself to dream beyond the confines of her circumstances. But now, she was part of something much bigger, something that challenged her, but also made her feel alive. Every morning, as she walked through the grand hallways of the mansion, she felt a sense of pride that she had never known before. The life she had once accepted as her fate was slowly being replaced by something else, something that was hers to shape. One afternoon, after a particularly long and exhausting meeting with the family's financial advisors, Dominic found Jasmine in the garden, sitting on a bench and staring out at the estate. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the flowers and trees. He walked over to her, his footsteps soft on the gravel path. "You're not in your office today," he said with a smile. Jasmine looked up at him, a little surprised to see him there. "I needed a break," she said, trying to keep her tone light. Dominic nodded and sat down beside her. "I understand. Things have been moving quickly. You've taken on a lot." Jasmine smiled, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "It's a lot to handle, but I'm getting used to it." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the wind rustling the leaves filling the space between them. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Dominic said after a while, his voice steady but with an edge of seriousness. Jasmine turned to him, curious. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about your future here," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I've seen how quickly you've adapted to the responsibility, and I think it's time for you to take the next step." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had worked hard, proving herself over and over, but she had never expected Dominic to talk about her future in such a serious way. "Next step?" she repeated, her voice uncertain. "What do you mean?" Dominic smiled, but there was something different in his expression. It wasn't the typical warm smile he gave when he was impressed or pleased. It was more thoughtful, almost as if he was weighing something important. "I want you to take on more leadership, more authority," he said, his voice calm but firm. Jasmine blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "More leadership? More authority? I want you to help shape the direction of the business," he continued. "You've proven that you have the skills and the vision. I trust you to make decisions that will affect the future of the Romano family." Jasmine's mind raced. She had never imagined herself in such a position of power, but now that Dominic was offering it to her, she felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "I mean, I've never been in charge of something this big before." Dominic placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I wouldn't offer it to you if I didn't believe you could handle it. I've seen what you're capable of, Jasmine. You're more than ready." Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. She had worked her entire life to survive, to prove that she was worth more than what others saw in her. And now, for the first time, she realized that she was finally being seen for who she truly was, a woman with the strength, intelligence, and determination to succeed. She smiled, her heart swelling with a sense of pride she had never allowed herself to feel. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady now. Dominic's smile widened. "I know you won't." Over the next few weeks, Jasmine threw herself into her new role. She worked alongside Dominic, learning the intricacies of the business, making decisions that affected everything from operations to investments. She was no longer just a trusted advisor. She was now a leader in her own right. It was challenging, but with every decision she made, Jasmine felt more confident. She wasn't just proving herself to Dominic anymore. She was proving it to herself. She was capable. She was strong. She was no longer the woman she had been when she first walked through the mansion doors. As time went on, Dominic continued to support her, offering advice and guidance when needed, but he also stepped back and allowed her to take charge. He trusted her completely. And as Jasmine became more comfortable in her new role, she realized just how far she had come. She had gone from being a woman who once felt invisible to someone who was now shaping the future of the family business. But it wasn't just about the business. Dominic had given her the opportunity to build a future for herself, one that was filled with possibility, freedom, and respect. And for the first time in her life, Jasmine felt like she truly belonged. Jasmine had never imagined that her life would take such a dramatic turn. When she had first arrived at the Romano mansion, she had only been seeking a way to survive, a way to escape the crushing weight of her past. But now, with each passing day, she found herself becoming someone she never thought she could be, a leader, a trusted partner, and someone with a future she could build on her own terms. The days blurred together as Jasmine worked alongside Dominic, handling important decisions, overseeing operations, and gaining more and more control over the family business. It was no longer just a job for her. It was her life's work, and she was starting to realize just how much she had accomplished. Dominic had placed his trust in her, and Jasmine was determined not to let him down. She had never wanted anything as badly as she wanted this opportunity to prove that she was capable of more than just surviving. She was capable of thriving. As time passed, the respect between them grew. There were moments when Dominic would look at her with a quiet appreciation that she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't the cold, calculating gaze he often wore when dealing with business matters. This was different. This was something more personal, more genuine. And Jasmine couldn't help but wonder if, in his own way, he was beginning to see her differently too. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Jasmine found herself alone in the garden again, as she often did when she needed to clear her mind. The air was cool, and the evening sky was painted in shades of pink and orange. She had become fond of these moments of solitude, where she could sit and reflect on how far she had come. But tonight, she wasn't alone for long. Dominic appeared, walking toward her with the same calm confidence he always carried. He sat down beside her without a word, his presence comforting in a way she hadn't expected. For a moment, they simply sat there in silence, watching the sunset together. It was peaceful, a rare moment where the weight of the world seemed to lift just a little. "You've been doing incredible work, Jasmine," Dominic said finally, breaking the silence. Jasmine turned to him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." Dominic shook his head slightly, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It's more than that. You've taken this business to new heights. You've made decisions that no one else could have." Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had never considered herself particularly special. She had always been the one left behind, the one who had to fight for everything she had. But now, for the first time, she was hearing someone powerful, acknowledge her for what she had accomplished. It felt surreal. "I never imagined I'd be here," Jasmine admitted, her voice tinged with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "I never thought I would be in charge of something like this." Dominic looked at her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You deserve it. You've earned it." There was a long pause, and Jasmine felt a mix of emotions flood through her. She had worked so hard to get to this point, but there was still a part of her that doubted whether she truly belonged. But as Dominic's words settled in her mind, she realized he was right. She did deserve it. She had worked harder than anyone to get to this point, and she wasn't going to let anyone, least of all herself, make her doubt that. "I'm ready," Jasmine said, her voice steady now, filled with the confidence she hadn't known she had. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this work." Dominic smiled, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "I know you will." As the days continued to pass, Jasmine's role within the family business only grew. She became more involved in every decision, every negotiation. She wasn't just a leader, she was becoming a force to be reckoned with. And with each victory, with each success, she felt more and more like the woman she had always hoped to be. But it wasn't just the business that had changed. Her relationship with Dominic had transformed as well. What had once been a simple employer-employee relationship had evolved into something deeper, something that neither of them had expected. There were moments when their conversations went beyond work, moments when they talked about their lives, their dreams, and the things that kept them awake at night. And with each passing day, Jasmine realized that the connection between them was undeniable. One evening, as they were walking through the mansion together after a successful meeting, Dominic turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You've changed everything, Jasmine," he said quietly. "You've changed me." Jasmine stopped walking, her heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic turned to face her fully, his gaze intense. "You've made me realize that there's more to life than just power and control. There's something more, something I didn't know I was missing until you came into my life." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. She had never imagined that the man who had built an empire on power and fear would say something like this. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the truth of his words. "I never wanted to change you," she said softly. "I just wanted to show you that there's more to life than what we see on the surface." Dominic reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You've done that, Jasmine. You've shown me a world I never thought was possible." And in that moment, Jasmine realized that her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. She had gone from a woman who felt invisible to someone who was seen, someone who mattered. And as she looked at Dominic, her heart full of hope, she knew that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than both of them. Jasmine had never imagined that the day she stepped into the Romano mansion would lead her to this moment. She had always told herself that survival was enough. She had worked tirelessly, day after day, hoping to escape the past that had haunted her for so long. But now, as she stood beside Dominic, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she realized how much had changed. Her life had transformed in ways she hadn't even dared to dream of. Dominic's words had meant more to her than she could express. He had seen something in her that no one else had, and for the first time in her life, she felt valued. The work she was doing wasn't just a job. It was a purpose, something that gave her life a deeper meaning. It was her chance to show the world, and more importantly herself, that she was capable of more than just surviving. As the days turned into weeks, Jasmine found herself growing into the role Dominic had offered her. She was no longer just a part of the Romano business. She was shaping it, making decisions that would influence its future. It was a responsibility that weighed heavily on her, but she embraced it fully, knowing that this was her moment to prove herself. There were days when the pressure felt overwhelming. There were moments when she doubted herself, wondering if she was really capable of handling it all. But then, Dominic would offer a quiet word of encouragement, a small smile, and she would remember why she was here. She wasn't just here because of his generosity. She was here because she had earned it. She had worked hard for this opportunity, and she was determined not to let it slip away. Dominic, for his part, continued to show his trust in her. He didn't just rely on her for business decisions. He sought her advice on matters that went beyond the business. She was becoming someone he turned to, not just as an employee, but as a partner, someone whose judgment he respected. That respect was something Jasmine hadn't anticipated. She had always seen him as a man of power, someone who had the world at his feet. But now, she was seeing a different side of him, a side that wasn't just cold and calculating, but warm and understanding. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. There were moments of tension, moments when the weight of their roles, his as the powerful Mafia boss, and hers as the woman rising through the ranks, made things complicated. But despite the tension, there was an undeniable bond between them, something unspoken that grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, after a particularly successful meeting with potential investors, Jasmine found herself walking through the garden with Dominic once more. The moonlight cast a soft glow on the flowers, and the air was filled with the scent of jasmine. It felt like the world had quieted, leaving them in a peaceful silence that felt almost sacred. Dominic broke the silence first. "You've come a long way, Jasmine," he said, his voice low and reflective. "I'm proud of what you've achieved." Jasmine looked at him, her heart full. She had heard him say words of praise before, but this time, there was something different about them. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about her. She had proven herself to him, but more importantly, she had proven it to herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I never thought I would be here, in this position, but you gave me the chance." Dominic stopped walking and turned to face her. "You earned it," he said firmly. You've shown more strength than most people could ever hope to have. Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. The words he spoke were ones she had never thought she would hear, not from someone like him. Dominic was a man who had everything, a man who could have anyone or anything he wanted. And yet, he was acknowledging her, someone who had come from nothing, someone who had fought for everything she had. I never imagined this for myself, Jasmine said, her voice thick with emotion. But now that I'm here, I'm not going to let it go. Dominic's eyes softened as he looked at her. I know you won't, he said. That's why I believe in you. They stood there for a moment, the weight of their words lingering in the air between them. Jasmine could feel the shift in their dynamic. It wasn't just about business anymore. There was something deeper, something more personal. She had always tried to keep her emotions in check, to never let anyone see the vulnerable parts of her. But now, with Dominic, she found herself opening up in ways she had never expected. The walls she had built around herself were slowly coming down. As the days passed, their bond deepened. Dominic began to trust her with more personal matters, and they spent more time together outside of the office. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about them and the connection they shared. Jasmine had never imagined that the man she had once seen as untouchable would become someone she could rely on, someone who cared about her. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Dominic took Jasmine out to dinner at one of the finest restaurants in the city. They sat at a quiet table by the window, overlooking the city lights. As they ate, the conversation turned to their personal lives, something they rarely discussed. Dominic looked at her with a serious expression. I've been thinking about everything you've done for me, for the family, he said, his voice steady. And I want you to know that I'm not just grateful for your work. I'm grateful for you. You've changed everything for me. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected to hear those words from him. I didn't do it for you, she said, her voice soft. I did it for me. Dominic smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. That's why you're different, he said. You do it for yourself, but in the process, you help everyone around you. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove herself to others, but now, for the first time, she realized that the only person she needed to prove anything to was herself. And with Dominic's trust, she was finally beginning to see her own worth. Jasmine sat in the quiet of her office, the glow of the city lights filtering through the windows. It had been a long, tiring week, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she was at peace. The weight of the responsibilities she had taken on no longer felt overwhelming. She had learned to navigate the complexities of the business, to make decisions that impacted not just the Romano family, but also herself. She had become someone who mattered in this world, a world she had once believed she could never belong to. As she sat there, reflecting on how much had changed since that first day she had walked into the mansion, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had come so far, and it was all because of Dominic. He had seen something in her when no one else did. He had given her a chance that no one else would have. But it wasn't just his belief in her that had brought her to this point. It was her own strength, her own determination. She had fought for everything she had, and she had worked harder than anyone to get to this place. And now, as she looked out at the city skyline, she realized that her life was hers to shape. The past no longer defined her. She was the one who held the reins to her future. Just then, the door to her office opened, and Dominic stepped in, his presence immediately filling the room. He looked as composed as ever, but there was something different about him. He seemed more relaxed, more at ease, as if the weight of his own world had shifted, too. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said, a small smile on his face. Jasmine looked up from her desk, her heart skipping a beat at the sight of him. No, not at all, she replied, smiling back. I was just thinking. Dominic walked over to her desk and leaned against it, his gaze steady. Thinking about what? He asked, his voice soft, yet full of curiosity. Jasmine hesitated for a moment. She had always kept her thoughts to herself, but with Dominic, it felt different. She had come to trust him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. I was just thinking about how far I've come, she said quietly. How much has changed? How much I've changed? Dominic nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've noticed, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. You've changed in ways that go beyond business. You're not just a part of the family business now. You're part of the family. Jasmine's heart swelled at his words. She had always known that Dominic valued her, but hearing him say it like this, it was different. It was more than just respect. It was acceptance. It was belonging. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've never felt like this before. I've never felt like I truly belonged." Dominic's gaze softened, and for a moment, there was a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "You belong here, Jasmine," he said quietly. "I've always believed in you, even before you realized it yourself." The words hung in the air between them, and Jasmine felt the familiar rush of emotions she had long buried deep inside. She had spent so much of her life hiding from the world, hiding from herself. But now, with Dominic's words, she felt a sense of peace she had never known. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Dominic gave her a small, knowing smile. "You would have figured it out. You're stronger than you realize." Jasmine shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I don't know about that," she said, "but I'm glad I don't have to figure it out alone anymore." Dominic straightened up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "You never have to be alone again, Jasmine. Not as long as I'm here." Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It wasn't just the business, it wasn't just the responsibilities. They had built something real, something beyond the confines of work. They had built a partnership, a connection that went deeper than she ever could have imagined. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic reached out and gently placed a hand on hers, his touch steady and comforting. "And I'm glad you're here, too," he said. There was a long silence between them, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. Jasmine didn't need to say anything more. She knew what he meant, and for the first time, she realized that her life was unfolding in ways she had never expected. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wasn't alone. She had Dominic by her side, and she had herself. And that was more than enough. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and growing success. Jasmine continued to take on more responsibilities, and each time, Dominic trusted her more. Their partnership grew stronger, and their bond deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were friends, allies, and, for Jasmine, something more. The walls she had once built around herself began to crumble as she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something greater than the life she had once known. She had never imagined that she could be a part of something so big, something that could change the course of her life. But here she was, standing beside the most powerful man in the city, building a future she had never thought possible. It was a future she would create, not just for herself, but for them both. Together, they would shape the future of the Romano family, and with it, they would shape their own destinies. And as Jasmine looked at Dominic, she knew that the best was yet to come. Jasmine walked through the grand halls of the mansion, her footsteps echoing in the silence. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the weight of the day's decisions seemed to hang heavy in the air. She had spent the last few weeks immersed in work, making choices that would shape the future of the Romano family business. And with each passing day, she felt herself growing more confident, more capable of handling the responsibility that had been placed on her shoulders. As she moved through the mansion, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. It felt like a lifetime ago when she had first walked into this place, a maid with nothing but hope and a will to survive. And now, here she was, trusted, respected, and part of something bigger than she had ever imagined. But as much as she had changed, there was still a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was just beginning. There was still so much to learn, so much to prove. And as much as Dominic had shown her the way, she knew that the path ahead would not always be easy. She had to stay sharp, stay focused. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. As Jasmine entered her office, she saw Dominic standing by the window, his back to her. The soft glow of the evening sun cast a warm light over him, and for a moment, she simply watched him. There was something about him that always seemed to command the room, even in silence. He turned as she entered, his expression softening when he saw her. "You've been working late," he said, his voice gentle. "I just finished reviewing the reports for next month," Jasmine replied, smiling. "I wanted to make sure everything was in order before the meeting tomorrow." Dominic walked over to her desk, his eyes scanning the papers in front of her. "You're thorough," he said, his tone appreciative. You've really made this role your own. Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of pride at his words. She had worked hard to prove herself, and hearing him acknowledge her efforts meant more than she could express. Thank you, she said quietly, looking up at him. It's all part of the job. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. It's more than that, Jasmine. You've become an integral part of this family. And not just because of your work. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that their relationship had grown beyond employer and employee, but hearing him say it so openly made everything feel more real. What do you mean? She asked, her voice soft. Dominic met her gaze, his expression serious. You've become someone I rely on, someone I trust. You've proven that you're not just capable, but that you care about the future of this family, about me. The words hit Jasmine harder than she expected. She had always admired Dominic, respected him for his strength and his leadership, but she had never imagined that he would see her as more than just a part of his team. She had always seen herself as an outsider, someone who had worked her way into his world, but now she was realizing that she had become an integral part of it. I do care, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. More than I ever thought I would. Dominic reached out, gently taking her hand in his. And that's why you're more than just a business partner to me, he said softly. Jasmine's heart raced at the touch, at the sincerity in his eyes. She had never imagined this moment, never expected that the man she had come to admire would say something like this to her. She had spent so much of her life avoiding intimacy, keeping people at arm's length. But with Dominic, everything felt different. She felt seen, valued, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she truly belonged. I've been thinking about something, Dominic continued, his voice low. About us. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what to say, but the quiet intensity in his eyes told her that this conversation was about to change everything. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. I want you to know that I'm here for you, he said quietly. Not just as your boss, not just as someone who relies on your skills, but as someone who cares about you, about your future. Jasmine's heart swelled at his words, and for the first time, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge the emotions that had been building inside her. She had always admired Dominic, but now, with his words, she realized that her feelings for him had grown deeper than she had ever intended. I care about you too, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. Dominic smiled, the warmth in his eyes unmistakable. I know, he said softly. I can see it in you. And I want you to know that you don't have to go through this alone. Whatever happens, I'm here with you. I'll always be here. Jasmine felt a wave of relief wash over her, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted. For so long, she had carried the burden of her past, the fear of never being enough, of never being seen for who she truly was. But now, with Dominic by her side, she felt like she could finally breathe. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Dominic pulled her into a gentle embrace, and for a moment, they stood there together, surrounded by the quiet of the mansion. Jasmine realized then that she had finally found her place, not just in the business, but in Dominic's world. And as they stood there, together, she knew that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than either of them had ever imagined. The days after their conversation felt different. There was a quiet understanding between Jasmine and Dominic, a new layer to their relationship that neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It wasn't just about the work they had been doing together. There was something more, something unspoken, but palpable. Jasmine found herself looking at Dominic in a way she hadn't before. It wasn't just admiration for his strength, his power, or his intelligence. It was something deeper, something that made her heart race whenever their eyes met. She couldn't deny it any longer. She had feelings for him. But she also knew that things had changed. They weren't just employer and employee anymore. They had become something else. It was a feeling she couldn't quite put into words, but it was there, lingering in the space between them. As much as Jasmine tried to focus on the tasks at hand, her mind would wander back to the moments they had shared. She would find herself thinking about their conversations, the way Dominic had opened up to her, the way he had shown her a side of himself that few ever saw. And with every passing day, the connection between them grew stronger. One evening, as the sky turned dark and the stars began to twinkle above, Dominic invited Jasmine to a private dinner. It was just the two of them, a quiet evening away from the chaos of the business. Jasmine felt a nervous excitement flutter in her chest as she made her way to the dining room. The table was set for two, a soft candlelight flickering between them. Dominic stood up as she entered, his usual composed demeanor softening in the intimate setting. "You look stunning," he said, his voice low and sincere. Jasmine blushed, feeling a warmth spread through her at his words. "Thank you," she replied, trying to keep her composure. Dominic gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, join me." As they sat down, the conversation flowed easily, but there was an undercurrent of something more, something unspoken. Jasmine couldn't help but notice the way Dominic's gaze lingered on her, the way he seemed to watch her as though he were seeing her for the first time. "I've been thinking," he said after a few moments of silence. Jasmine looked up at him, curious. "What about?" "About everything," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "About you, about how much you've changed everything for me. You've opened my eyes to things I never thought about." Jasmine's heart raced at his words. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said, her voice soft. "I just did what needed to be done." Dominic shook his head, his expression serious. "No, Jasmine, you've done more than that. You've shown me a side of myself I didn't know existed. You've made me rethink everything, what I want, what I need." Jasmine felt a knot form in her stomach. She had always admired Dominic, respected him for his strength and leadership. But now, hearing him speak like this, she realized just how much their relationship had evolved. It wasn't just about the business anymore. There was something more, something that tied them together in a way she hadn't expected. "I never imagined this," she said quietly. "That I would be here, that we would be here." Dominic reached across the table, his hand resting on hers. "I never imagined it either," he said softly. "But I'm glad we are." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at him. For the first time, she realized that the connection between them was undeniable. They had come so far, and they had built something together, something that went beyond work, beyond the business. It was something personal, something real. Dominic's hand gently squeezed hers, and in that moment, Jasmine knew that everything had changed. She wasn't just a part of the family business anymore. She was part of something much deeper, something that neither of them could deny. As the evening wore on, they shared stories, laughed, and spoke about their hopes for the future. It was a conversation unlike any they had ever had before, one that felt natural, easy, and full of promise. As they finished their meal, Dominic stood up and extended his hand to her. "Come with me," he said, his voice low. Jasmine followed him, her heart racing as she wondered what he meant. They walked through the mansion, the quiet of the evening enveloping them. Dominic led her to a balcony that overlooked the city below. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, casting a soft glow over everything. Dominic turned to her, his expression serious but filled with warmth. "I've been thinking about our future," he said, his voice steady. Jasmine looked at him, her heart in her throat. "What about it?" "I want you to know that you're not just a part of the business, Jasmine," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "You're part of my life. You've become someone I can't imagine my world without." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She had always known that their relationship had changed, but hearing him say it so openly made everything feel more real. She wasn't just a trusted advisor anymore. She wasn't just the woman who helped him run the business. She was someone who had become essential to him, someone he valued in ways she had never imagined. "Dominic, she began, but he gently placed a finger on her lips, silencing her. "I know," he said softly. "I feel the same way." The moment lingered between them, filled with a quiet understanding. Jasmine knew that this was just the beginning of something new. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready for whatever came next. Together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. And with Dominic by her side, Jasmine knew she was no longer just surviving. She was living, thriving, and building a future she had never thought possible. The weeks following their intimate conversation were filled with a quiet sort of anticipation. Jasmine continued to rise within the ranks of the Romano family, her responsibilities growing as she proved herself more and more capable. The weight of the decisions she was making, the trust Dominic had placed in her, felt like both a burden and a privilege. She could see how much the family business was shifting, and she knew that her role was pivotal in making sure the future ran smoothly. But alongside the business, her personal relationship with Dominic continued to deepen. They spent time together outside of work, enjoying simple moments of connection that felt natural. Jasmine began to realize that, despite the tension and the pressure, she felt more at ease with Dominic than she ever had with anyone else. There was an unspoken understanding between them, something that transcended words. Dominic had been nothing short of supportive, guiding her, teaching her, and encouraging her every step of the way. But lately, there had been moments when their conversations would drift beyond the business. He would ask her about her dreams, about her past, about the things that truly mattered to her. And, bit by bit, she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had always kept her emotions locked away, never allowing herself to trust anyone too fully. But with Dominic, it felt different. He wasn't just her employer anymore. He had become someone she trusted, someone who made her feel safe in a way she hadn't known she could. One evening, as they walked through the expansive gardens of the estate, the air cool and crisp, Jasmine turned to Dominic. "You've changed everything for me," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Dominic glanced at her, a small smile forming on his lips. "I didn't do anything. You did this on your own." Jasmine shook her head, her thoughts a little jumbled. "No, you gave me the opportunity. You believed in me when no one else did." Dominic stopped walking, turning to face her. The moment felt heavy with meaning. "You've earned that belief, Jasmine. I didn't give it to you out of charity. I gave it to you because you showed me that you had more inside of you than anyone could have guessed." Jasmine looked into his eyes, her heart racing. "I don't think I ever really believed in myself until I started working with you," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I was always so focused on just getting by, on surviving, that I never allowed myself to dream beyond that." Dominic's expression softened as he reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. "I understand more than you think," he said quietly. "But I need you to understand something too. You're not just here because I gave you a chance. You're here because you proved that you can do more than just survive. You're here because you're thriving." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent so much of her life doubting her worth, wondering if she would ever be more than just the sum of her past mistakes. But now, as Dominic stood there, his gaze steady and filled with something close to affection, Jasmine realized that she was no longer that woman. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and she was doing it on her own terms. Over the next few months, Jasmine continued to work closely with Dominic, her role in the business becoming more entrenched as time went on. She found herself taking on more responsibilities, not just within the family business, but within the family itself. She became someone Dominic turned to for advice, for guidance, for support. And with each passing day, Jasmine felt her confidence grow. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was a key player in the Romano family's future. But it wasn't just the business that kept her close to Dominic. There were moments when she would catch him watching her, his gaze lingering longer than usual. And there were moments when she would catch herself looking at him the same way. She had come to realize that their connection had deepened in ways neither of them had expected. It wasn't just respect anymore. It wasn't just admiration. There was something more, something that neither of them had fully acknowledged, but something they both felt. One evening, after another late night spent working, Dominic invited Jasmine to his office. The mansion was quiet, the staff having long gone home for the night, and the only sound in the large room was the rustling of papers as Dominic finished up his work. "I've been thinking," he said, breaking the silence as he leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on her. Jasmine looked up from her notes, her heart beating a little faster at the way he was looking at her. "About what?" she asked, her voice slightly hesitant. Dominic's eyes softened, and he set down the papers he was holding. "About us," he said quietly. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, and she felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic stood from his desk, walking toward her slowly. There was a quiet intensity to his movements, and Jasmine couldn't help but feel her pulse quicken. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he continued, his voice steady but soft. "About how I changed everything for you. But the truth is, Jasmine, you changed everything for me too. You've opened my eyes to things I never thought about. You've made me believe in something I've been too afraid to admit." Jasmine stood up, her heart racing as she looked at him. She couldn't quite grasp what he was saying, but there was a sense of clarity in his words that made her chest tighten. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Dominic reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm saying that I care about you, Jasmine. More than just as a business partner. More than just as someone who works for me. I care about you in a way I didn't think I could care for anyone." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Jasmine felt as though the world had shifted, as though everything that had happened between them had led to this moment. She had never imagined that Dominic, the man she had respected and admired, could feel the same way about her. But as he stood there, looking at her with so much sincerity in his eyes, she knew that this was real. She wasn't just a part of his business. She was a part of his life. And for the first time, Jasmine allowed herself to fully embrace what that meant. She had come to realize that the future wasn't just something she could control in the business. It was something she was building with Dominic, together, hand in hand.